Okay, so I'm just going to dive into this. I know that there's a 15-minute limit, excuse me. I will try to meet that. However, this would be a lot more interactive if I were with my classmates right now, so I will do my best to mimic this. Okay, here's my presentation on my professional goals within Pritzker School, particularly my visual aid in Mathematics 1. So for my opening activity, this is where I would interact the most with my peers to try kind of ease them into my goal and why I chose it and the importance of it. So how to do a pirouette. So I would tell my peers to quickly scan each of these steps and then jokingly tell them, okay, once you've read this, show me your pirouette. I chose this because this is not something a lot of people have an expertise in, something that I'm quite familiar with, and I felt that I could explain or judge the exactness of pretty well. So then I would tell them, okay, now study this visual aid on how to do a pirouette. And once they did that, I would ask, what was more helpful in the small amount of time that you had to acquire this skill? And I think that we would agree as a class that this visual aid that kind of helps with bodily location and simple tasks helps a lot more than this quite detailed, lengthy kind of uh, list to help us acquire the skill. So this and on this slide, I would stress how this is the same in terms of acquiring skills within the classroom. So I would dive into this based on this kind of silly opening activity. So my professional goal focus was I will utilize more unique visual models and manipulatives into my math instruction while still being age appropriate. Uh, I only teach math in terms of the resource room. I don't teach ELA, so I wanted it to be math focused. And my kids in fourth grade are diving deeper into more abstract subjects. And so I wanted to make sure that I could support them visually because most of them benefit from that, from visual models in a way that was unique, catered to their needs, and was still appropriate for being in fourth grade. So yeah, let's dive into that. So why I chose this, like I said, it was a personal goal of mine to since I do only teach math in this placement in the resource room, I wanted to make it as unique and as special and supportive as possible. Also, just going through my students' IEPs, I would say 95% of them have it written into their IEP in their accommodations that they need visual modeling or visual aids or manipulatives as an accommodation for their learning. So not only was it helpful for me to look deeper into this goal, but it was also necessary for my students' learning to have these effective visual models and manipulatives. Um, Sort of how I kept track of this, I had a table in which I could describe briefly my lesson just for the sake of remembrance, since most days are pretty crazy, as all as we know. Um, and then I kind of had a reflection piece for both me, how I thought it went, and how my cooperating teacher thought my visual modeling or manipulatives incorporation went. And then I had a section for a grade, which was based on a rubric of from least effective to very effective with varying nuances within that, such as student enjoyment and student independent utilization. Again, I tried to do this because most days are crazy. I tried to do this about once a week, and I didn't just use this rubric and this scoring just on my fourth grade students. I also used it on my younger students just to get a feel of how this would stretch and generalize across grade levels. This was in the math resource room, and like I said, it was generalized across 4 grades, mostly grades 1 and 4, with sometimes grades 2 and 3. So here's a simple layout of my data. Like I said, I originally recorded this on a table. This is a simple graph understanding of what this looked like. On my x-axis, you can see my lesson number, and this starts from the beginning of my placement to the latter half of it, and then my effectiveness grade based on that rubric. And as you can see, it's not a very linear line. It's very up and down and all over the place. So we can unpack that a little bit. Yeah, so in terms of these outcomes, just a little bit of information about that is that every single day that I recorded feedback and I received feedback and I reflected on my own personal feedback, it informed the next day of instruction and use of visual aids. I feel as though in this program it's been stressed a lot that this is integral to your effectiveness in teaching, and this case was no different in terms of my goal. As I noted, there was no clear pattern or linear pattern of me, improving immensely, and it didn't start very low to begin with. And I truly do think that is because I took a lot of chances during this, but we'll get to that in a later bullet point. As I said, nothing fell below a 3. 3 was kind of, without the rubric being here, was my baseline for effectiveness. So anything below 3 was ineffective, and it just depended on the level of ineffectiveness. So I'm happy to say that nothing fell below effective in terms of learning. It's just some days were less effective than others. That taking chances bullet. So I was going to say I attribute the lack of linear data in this goal purely due to the fact that every kid is different and every day is different, especially in special ed. And so some days kids were really interested in what I had, and what I had really worked and catered to their needs, and sometimes it didn't. Part of that rubric was student interest and student independent utilization, and some things they might have really loved but weren't accessible to them independently without my help or prompting. Or some days things just didn't really help as much as words did, or writing things down did. So I don't think that this lack of linear path I don't think it indicates any sort of weaknesses in my own teaching. I do think it definitely, the lower scores helped me understand what was more effective. But taking chances and really trying things that you find through whoever, the internet, I think this really helps because it shows what your kids like and what's personal to them and what will support their learning. So that's okay if it's not a perfect upward slope. And this comes with trial and error. There are things that I tried that I thought would never ever work and ended up being one of my higher scoring goal or lessons in my goal area. And then there are things that I planned perfectly to a T and I expected to be received so well and help students, and it didn't exactly. And so it really takes that trial and error to figure out what works and what doesn't. That being said, everything that you use in terms of visual modeling has to be planned out really, really mindfully and needs to be presented in an appropriate way. And I'm not denying that at all, but I also think it's a matter of trial and error. Not everything works for anyone. This comes with getting to know your students' learning styles. I know my kids who are extremely visual and can use simple pictorial representations of what we're learning versus kids who need to have something physically in their hands. This comes with just being with students and really dig into what is personal to them and what they enjoy and ask them. Most of my kids told me, yeah, Miss Taylor, I learn better with pictures, or I learn better when I'm, have something to represent these numbers. And so always get to know your students' learning styles. And I think this really helped me and helped me figure out what worked for them and helped me score those higher scores. Being resourceful, I would say this is almost my number one outcome from these scores, is that I explored my resources beyond my own little bubble. So the internet is your best friend in terms of this. There's tons on the internet about what can be supportive for students for certain subjects. There are things that I had a really hard time figuring out how to support. I found in particular area and perimeter was something that I largely touched on, and there's great things for that. And then also just going to more knowledgeable others, such as my cooperating teacher, helped a lot for me as a new teacher starting out. So don't be afraid to ask for help wherever that may be. And my highest scores. I kind of touched on this earlier, and I believe that my highest scores maybe were a little bit of luck, a little bit of chance, and also how mindfully I planned something out and presented it. Um, the highest scores for me were I set the expectation to how students were going to be using the visual models the day of, and I mindfully thought of each student's needs in terms of what a lesson might look like, and I kind of plugged visual modeling or manipulatives into those spaces prior to even presenting it to them. And I think it also, those high scores just came with the day. I mean, maybe that's a cop-out, but I truly believe after doing this for a bit and chatting with my cooperating teacher about it, like sometimes things will work one day and the next day they will not. So I think it's a lot of hard work came with the highest scores, but also a little bit of luck. So in terms of what makes visual modeling effective and why did I choose this as my goal? Why do I want to use visual modeling and supports and manipulatives? And of course, this is something in special ed we know that is effective, and so I wanted to highlight some of those things. Um, Modeling provides a central and fundamental tool for describing, exploring complex phenomena. This quote from Fierzig and Roberts was exactly why I chose this for my goal, is because my students were heading into more complex subjects, and the modeling really helped them move into that space and helped me present it in a more effective way. And I have this lovely quote by Ball, and it is a little bit of an older quote. So that being said, I don't think it makes it any less true. It was at the beginning of like sort of this diving into visual modeling. I still think it's true that we need to increase the participation of a much wider range of students. And here in this TED Talk, Matthew Peterson highlights that exactly. So we can go ahead and watch a second or two of that. So. So I'll leave this right here. I ideally would show a big chunk of this video. I'm not quite sure what time I'm at, so I'm just for the sake of getting this recorded. I would have the rest of my peers, or my peers, watch quite a bit of this video. Something to highlight, basically what he said about words being learning barriers. I think that I started this